Since the onset of the pandemic, hate crimes against Asian Americans have been increasing throughout the country, even with a significant increase here in Boston. But the problem became much more alarming with the recent fatal shootings in Georgia, mainly targeting Asian American women. One response to the trend is a virtual town hall scheduled for tomorrow night, organized by the state's Asian American Commission. Our guests are from two of the community organizations participating: the director of the Asian Outreach Project at Greater Boston Legal Services, Bethany Li, and the executive director of the Asian American Resource Workshop, Carolyn Chou. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks for having us.
Carolyn, I want to ask you about the work that the workshop has been doing over many years. You came out with a report in the 1980s about violence against Asians, and that was associated with a lot of population changes in the neighborhoods here in Boston. But what about what's happening now? It must be different in some way.
Yeah, thanks for highlighting that, Chris. Absolutely. We have a long history as Asian Americans in this country and as an organization of anti-Asian violence and responding to it. Particularly what we see in Dorchester, where we're located, is anti-Asian violence that began when folks were resettled, right, from Southeast Asia to neighborhoods like Dorchester, to cities like Lowell after the war. And we see that the rise then, and now actually we see deportation of the same community members back to countries they may have never lived in. So we see lots of kinds of violence like that is connected to that history of violence, which we could talk about how it goes back many years and centuries. But I think in this moment, as you asked, we're really understanding this violence historically and in this moment to be at the intersection of race, gender, class, and immigration. So what we saw in Atlanta, right, they're Asian American people. They're also women. They're also workers. They're also immigrants. They're low-wage workers. They're doing work that is so often demeaned in our society. And so we can't separate those issues, and we know that women are the backbones of our community, and so much violence and the root of structural violence is at that intersection.
Bethany, what about the way this comes at people? Because it could be a workplace experience, it could be when you're riding on public transit, or could be on social media. You see something come up and someone's trying to pull your trigger. I mean, what does that do to people?
I think that's why we've seen so much fear from the community, right? And I think we're seeing fear across the board, no matter what profession or class or whatever you're in. We're seeing fear across the board from Asians because of the violence that we're seeing, that we know has always existed, right? Is something that can affect you when you're just walking down the street. That's what we're seeing. And I think that's what's scariest to people. And so then the question is how do we respond to that fear?
And what about people's needs?
I mean, what we see day to day, we work with a significant low-income Asian population. And what we see is that while people are fearful, they also still need to go to work every day, right? We represent people who work in nail salons and restaurants. And for a lot of the pandemic, even though many of us have been at home, for restaurant workers, that has not been the case. For home health aid workers, that has not been the case. And so they're the ones taking the subways. They're the ones walking the streets and on streets that are pretty empty, right, as a result of the pandemic and the lockdown. And so what that means is that, in terms of addressing the fear that people are facing, making sure that there is food on the table the next day, that there is money to pay rent. All those types of things are the very real things that our clients are facing.
Carolyn, what would you like to see come out of the town hall? Getting more people talking about this, I think that might be a step in the direction.
Yeah, I agree with you, Chris. I think this is an opportunity, right, for us to talk about the various ways Asian American communities experience violence and discrimination, as well as, the ways in which that is linked and we are in solidarity with other communities of color. We also, though, know that we need policy change. We need systemic solutions. And so, we are hoping that coming out of this, we will not only open more conversation, as we said, at this intersection of race, gender, worker, immigrant identity, and also to push for policies at the state level, particularly that meet those needs, right? So for us, equitable recovery from COVID is a response to anti-Asian violence and racism, and is something we really want to push forward, right? As Bethany said, around jobs, around rent, and around all these pieces. And just one other piece is, we've been pushing for data equity. So for the state to collect data that's specific to the ethnic communities, because we know that Asian experiences are not a monolith, and there is a lot that is lost when we lump everyone together. So, data equity is an opportunity for us to begin to better meet the needs of our communities, and something we really hope to pass soon, as well as more adequate language access at the city and state level across the state.
Bethany, what about the ability of people to address problems through a legal system? Because yes, you have cases of shootings where it's obvious, but do you have other kinds of problems where it's not so obvious, and maybe not everybody understands that this might be a civil rights violation or something like that? What needs to change there?
Do you mean in terms of how to address the violence that's occurring?
Yes, if you've been victimized and you want to do something about it, if it's violence, you call the police. Yes, but if it's not exactly physical violence, but it is something else that's really bad, do people need a better channel to deal with that?
I mean, what will come out of our town hall is hopefully a lot of resources that people can start accessing. There are bystander harassment trainings. There's a whole variety of things that are possible to begin educating ourselves on in order to better respond to either the violence or the harassment that's occurring. I think what we've seen in terms of the response so far is, I think people are seeing, is that the invisibility of being Asian American is what's fueling, I think, a lot of the reaction and the outpouring. And I think, and to see then the violence that is so visible on our screens, but also I think that we experience in our everyday lives has been challenging. And so I do think hopefully that the town hall will offer avenues, whether it's trainings or opportunities to work with the communities that we work with day to day, resources for children, right, in schools, especially as schools are reopening, and really making sure that our experiences as people of color, as Asian Americans in this country, are seen in curriculums, for example, in the day-to-day. I think that's going to be incredibly important for helping to think through some of the healing that needs to happen.
Carolyn, if you go back to the 1980s in Dorchester, you had these cases of hate crimes that were mainly about vandalizing houses and cars. Yes, there were a couple of fatalities as well, but these days a lot of it's online. You've got these people following former President Trump saying it's okay to advocate for your side by triggering the other side. What about that part of the problem?
Yeah, I certainly think that as our society has changed, as the way we consume media has changed, it's changed both the text, some of the texture of the violence, but I think it's also changed the response, and it's allowed for more people to be aware and to create space to mobilize together and to heal together. So I think, I think there are challenging pieces, and I certainly think, right, we see the way over the past 4 years, the way Twitter and social media have been used is extremely harmful. And I think when we look at the young people who are leading the way right now, they are organizing for change on social media, and they are mobilizing each other and sharing really sharp assessment online. And so I see it as both pieces. But I agree that I think that the way some of these instances have come up, it is a little bit ahistorical, and the video goes viral maybe a week after it happens, right? So it's hard to really center the needs of the survivors or the victims. And I think that's why Atlanta was such a moment, right? Because we really saw it in real time. We saw it both on the news and in social media, and we saw it at the intersection of race and gender, that we as Asian American women know, and other women of color know, is so essential to understanding our experiences and who's most marginalized in our communities.
I want to see if you can continue that thread, because a lot of the concern here has to do with women and where they work. What do you see as the main point of vulnerability?
Well, I think it's what Bethany said, right? In this pandemic moment, who has had to go to work every day, right? Who has had to get up and get on the train and walk down the street while many of us are at home, and what extra threat and stress that causes. And folks are going to nail salons, they're going to restaurants, they're home healthcare workers, right? They're nannies, and these are the under-resourced industries that our folks are in. And yeah, so I think that, that is fundamental to it, as well as, all of the burden women carry, whether they are single mothers or not, right? Having to think about work, potentially children, rent, food, all of these things that we've seen have been heightened, the disparity in all of that basic needs during COVID. And that doesn't even get at, the issue of domestic violence and intimate partner violence, which we know has been, a challenge and on the rise during COVID.
Bethany, what about the ability to get help from, the law and order establishment? You've got language barriers, you've got people concerned about immigration status they don't want to report. How do you get over that barrier?
I don't know if you do, right? I mean, I think those are the exact barriers that we see our clients dealing with day to day. And what we see is that, while people sometimes do immediately turn to police or, and think about that as safety, there's also a significant population that doesn't, because of immigration status, and even, or language barriers. And, just a case came in just this morning where a woman we were talking to didn't realize that calling 911 because she was injured meant and she can't speak English, right, would mean that her partner, who has a green card, would be arrested, even though it had nothing to do with him, right? And those are just situations that we see every day in communities where even if immigration status isn't a problem, that the language barriers exist to mean that people are arrested for no reason. And I think it's difficult for our communities.
By the way, do either of you want to make a plug for the town meeting that's going to be happening tomorrow?
Sure. Yeah, I think we're so excited that there's been so much interest. We're devastated that this is the reason, but we're so grateful that so many folks have shown interest in this event. We're hosting the Asian Pacific Islander Civic Action Network, along with the Asian American Commission, and many community groups are hosting a town hall tomorrow on Thursday to discuss all the facets of anti-Asian racism and violence. So we'll be talking about what has happened during COVID and the historical roots of this violence, as well as how it impacts many different women and immigrants and folks in our community. So I think it will be a rich discussion highlighting everyday people, particularly immigrant women workers' stories, and allow for question and answer, and us to begin a discussion and to move together towards systemic change and healing.
Well, thank you both very much for taking the time to be with us.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.
That's Carolyn Chou from the Asian American Resource Workshop, and Bethany Li from Greater Boston Legal Services. We'll have more news in just a moment.